So, Joe, do you have a new daily routine you'd like to walk us through?
Not exactly, but I have some plans for said routine because I can't put it in place yet. And it's going to be, let's see, when we record next, I won't be able to have it in place yet, but the time after that, I should be able to.
Okay.
And what I've been working through, because Becky and I have talked about it a little bit, and I think what we're landing on is a lot of what we're currently doing actually works really, really well. And the pieces that are going to change involve like going outside as a family and walking through woods and such and exploring property and such when we normally wouldn't be able to do that. So those pieces are ones that we're trying to figure out what we would like to have in place, but not formally locking it in quite yet. So I think in 2 books, we'll at least have the beginnings of that experiment to talk through. But right now, really what it is like I want to be able to go outside and walk trails and such before breakfast, have breakfast with the family, and then if at all possible, at some point in the day, all of us are going to go outside and do something in nature where we can, because obviously with woods and such right out the back door, stuff like that gets real easy. Mm-hmm. So we want to make that part of our daily routine. I'm just not sure where that lands in the day because my schedule doesn't really allow like lunchtime and such, but maybe we do it after I get off work. I don't know what that is. So that's the piece that I think we're trying to put in place. Obviously, the evening walk through the trails and such I'm going to keep. So, yes, that's what I know at the moment. But it's still like we got to get moved before I can say
Sure.
This is what it's going to be.
Yeah, I love that you measure time in books, in 2 books. I'll have
in 2 books.
This new daily routine's kind of like little kids, like 3 big sleeps till my birthday.
Yes, because the little sleeps don't count. Yes.
Yep. Also, when you said at the beginning that you don't have a new daily routine, but there's the thought of the daily routine, it reminded me of You've Got Mail.
Oh.
When I always can never remember her character's name. Meg Ryan, her character in the movie is having dinner with, at that point, her boyfriend, and she walks out of the movie theater, they go grab dinner, he admits that he likes somebody else, and then she says the same thing, and he asks her, is there somebody else? And she's like, no, but there's the thought of somebody else.
Yep.
That's Joe with his it's the daily routine.
So true. The thought of a daily routine that is functional.
Nice.
That sounds glorious right now.
Cool.
How about you? You got a handful of things, not just daily routine type stuff.
I do. So I mentioned I'll start with the easy one, the do not disturb sign. I actually have that. It's on my door right now. It says, please do not disturb, big red X. On the other side, it has a green check mark, welcome, please knock before you would come in. And it came in a 2-pack, so I have one on each side of the door to remind myself as I'm going to leave the office that I need to turn it over on the other side. To make sure that it's
nice.
It's accurate.
That's a good way to do that. Because in theory, you could always look over there and see what's currently on the other side of the door.
Yeah, I don't turn them over at the same time usually, but seeing it as I'm leaving my office is a reminder that, yeah, there's one on the front that I should update, basically. So this will be the real test because there are piano lessons going on upstairs, so people have to be quiet upstairs. Usually when that happens, it's go in the basement and be crazy. But I'm recording in the basement, so the red hue light at the top of the stairs is on, and the red do not disturb door hanger is in front. So hopefully no one will come into my office while we are recording this, and this will be a lot easier for Toby to edit than the last episode.
That last one was rough. Good job, Toby.
Yeah, we were joking about that before we hit record. He left in a few of the drill noises because you had some comedic timing on some of them, and he was pretty proud of that edit. But
well done, sir.
The other ones, go for walks. Have been doing this. I mentioned, I think last episode, I joined a co-working space in downtown Appleton, and that's where I like to do my walks because there's this trail right by the river. So I like going down there and walking that trail, working from the co-working space. It's kind of a different energy, and it's nice to get out of the house every once in a while. The other one, simplify my life. I have started this, not much progress here. I don't have anything I have cut out of my schedule. I did sign up for, now I'm blanking on this guy's name. We read the book, The Minimalist Home, Joshua Becker.
Yeah.
He's got a uncluttered course that I signed up for. So Rachel and I are going to go through that, but she doesn't know it yet. I know she'll be all about this though. This is kind of her thing. I'm the hoarder in our relationship. She just like cleans stuff out and I'm going to throw away all this stuff. And I'm like, what? No, you can't give that up. So
yep,
I'm sure she'll be all about this. One accidental follow-up thing that you made me do from a couple episodes ago, you inspired me to start walking around my house.
Yep.
So I did that and I noticed my house was disgusting. So all day on Saturday last week, I power washed my house.
Well done, sir. Good job.
And now it is pristine and peaceful to sit outside on our deck again. I didn't even really realize how nasty it was till I started walking around it every day. And then I saw it.
Yep.
Now it's clean. So thank you.
Yep. I think that's a win. That's a big piece of why I do it. It's like, I want to know what changes over time, like what is starting to grow in places it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
What am I yet to take care of?
Yeah. So that happened that Saturday. I had other plans for that Saturday, but that's okay.
Sorry, I ruined
it.
Those.
Got done. It's all right. So that's follow up. You ready to jump into today's book?
I think we better. This could be a long one.
This could. So this is The Extended Mind, The Power of Thinking Outside the Brain by Annie Murphy Paul. There are 3 parts to this book, but I'm not going to say this is your standard productivity type book. I feel like if there was ever a book that justified its 3 parts, it's this one.
Yeah, we of course rag on 3-part books, but there are a number of cases where it makes perfect sense and it should be a 3-part book, and it's validated in this one.
Yeah. So there are 9 chapters. We're going to try to go through them all, I think, because they're all relevant. They're all good. There's big ideas in all of them, but they're broken down 3 chapters per part. Part 1 is thinking with our bodies. Part 2 is thinking with our surroundings. Part 3 is thinking with our relationships. And then in the conclusion, I'm not sure if you noticed this, she has principles for mind extending, and they are, again, broken into 3 parts and 3 principles. They don't match up perfectly with these parts. Like, it's not the same blanket term title that she's using, but they align very well. So she has done tons of research and condensed it down very well into a very approachable book on a very complicated topic, I would argue.
I mean, it's a case where there's a lot of neuroscience and studies and research and stuff that is talked about within this book. So having read a lot of books that involve neuroscience at this point, we know that there's something about the number 3 and the human brain. Like, we know that. So it makes perfect logic in this case that she is taking 3 parts, 3 chapters per part, and sticking with that, because there's obviously like some research and science used in the layout and setup of the book itself, alongside the research is talked about within the content of that book. So obviously there's a lot of thought gone into this one.
Yes, absolutely. Let's start with actually the introduction. I just want to real briefly call out something here, because you've heard probably our brain is like a computer, our brain is like a muscle. She makes the argument right at the beginning that our brain is like a magpie.
Yes.
Do you know what a magpie is? Or did you know what a magpie was before reading this book?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
They're obnoxious.
Okay.
They're a nuisance. It's kind of like crows. Like they are like from the same, what is that, subspecies? I don't know what the technical is for that, but they're from the same little family, and
taxonomy.
They're considered a nuisance bird.
Okay. Yeah, I had no idea. But magpies apparently are nuisance birds that build nests out of whatever they can find. And the analogy she's making at the beginning here is that that's what our brains do. They weave bits and pieces that they find into our trains of thought. And so it's a very compelling argument right at the beginning for getting better at thinking outside of our brains, because there's all this junk that you could could be building your nest with your magpie brain if you're not careful. And that we've talked about a lot of different times, that there's more information that we have to deal with than ever before. It comes at us faster. It's more specialized. And it just makes sense that you would look outside your brain to what are the factors that are impacting what is going on inside of your brain. I did not realize that the title of this book kind of comes from a paper called The Extended Mind. One of the people that inspired or wrote that paper is Andy Clark, who in 1997 left his computer on the train, realizing that, oh no, I have left part of my brain on the train, which that is interesting to me. 1997, the laptop. But as we'll probably talk about at some point here in this episode, I immediately jumped to those connected note-taking apps, like, say, Obsidian. And I think an argument could be made for pros versus cons with that. But as it pertains to this book, I think she would say that that's a completely valid approach to have something, whether it's an application, a device, a notebook, index cards, whatever. If you're analog Zettelkasten guy, go for it. But having some sort of scaffolding for thinking outside of your brain probably makes you a better thinker overall.
It's so fast. And because I knew you were going to make this connection. Like, I've known this was coming from the time I saw the title of the book. It's like, oh, okay. Well, guess what's coming up very quickly in this episode? And I knew that 2 weeks ago. And yet, as I went through it, there were a lot of places where I felt like she was arguing against that model. So that's my bias that was coming out in the way that she put this together. So we'll see how that turns out as we get to those specific points. But you're absolutely right. Like, having something outside of your mind is like a superpower.
I will say at the beginning here, this introduction part, I probably thought this is going to pop up all over the place, and I'll be making all sorts of notes and points about connecting things inside of a graph view inside of Obsidian. I think there was one other spot where I jotted something down pertaining to that. So she would probably say it's valuable, but it's not the be all end all maybe that some people make it out to be, which I would like to think that is my approach. Maybe that's not how it comes across when I talk about it, because I do see the value in it, but I also think it's one part of a larger system. So this whole book has really got me thinking about the larger system of where do the ideas come from and how do they get managed. And yeah, I use Obsidian for a good chunk of playing with those, but there are lots of things that you can do to get better ideas even before you get to like the capture phase. When you get into, well, let's just jump into this first section here, because thinking with our bodies, this is one way that you can do that. I think there's 3 chapters here. Let's go in order. So first chapter is thinking with sensations. The concept of interoception comes up here, which is an awareness of the inner state of the body. And interoception leads perfectly into the whole concept of mindfulness meditation. And in fact, she flat out says that increases interoceptive ability. So this is where my first action item comes in.
So the moment we get into the content of the book and we're past the introduction, Mike has an action item. All right,
an action item that I don't like because it's popped up over and over again and I can't get it to stick. So my action item literally says, meditate for reals, !
With a Z, I hope.
With a Z. Yeah, so this...
Okay.
The reason this keeps coming up is every time I hear about it in a new context, I feel like there's something else that I had not realized about this that appears valuable to me. The point that she makes in this chapter is basically that your brain is pulling in all this information from all over the place. I am recognizing through the action item of trying to simplify my life, there are things that I'm involved with, which if I was just going to cut out all the negative stuff, be like, I don't want to be in a situation where I feel a certain way anymore. I would love to be able to do that, but I can't do that. So I recognize now like certain things coming at me that I don't want to stick. And I think I let them stick because I don't practice this mindfulness, and you don't have to use a certain app for this interoceptive awareness. This is something where you just kind of recognize what you're feeling and why. You kind of name it. And that's how she kind of described this mindfulness meditation, is like you see the things that are there for what they really are, and that's where the value comes from. And I'm recognizing that I I hang on to stuff. I need to let it go. And I'm hoping this will help me just kind of recognize, oh, that's there. Well, now we can move on.
I'm going to make a weird connection here. Let's go into Christian prayer. Okay. So a lot of times people will talk about how their daily prayer time is one of the most important parts of their day. And it's not because of yes, it's because of the connection with God and a higher power to go down that road. But at the same time, what they're saying is during that period when you're praying, you have to reflect and think about all the things that are going on in life, and then either verbally or mentally call out what's wrong, what's right, what is it you need, and you have to articulate that in some form or another. So you're going through the process of thinking about your life or the lives of the people around you, the people who matter to you, and then putting a name or a term to either a good thing or a negative thing or a desire that you would like for yourself or them. And by doing that, you're able to then think about what is going on. Like, it is that mindfulness process. Like, you're able to term what's happening. Now, the whole letting it go part isn't connected to that technically, but that's where the process of, if you take meditation the way a lot of people do it, you're trying to clear your mind. And when thoughts come into your mind, you're letting them go, and then trying to keep a clear mind during that process. That's not easy. Like, the first time you do that, you realize how many thousands of thoughts bump into your head like every 10 seconds. Like, it's just ridiculous. And trying to clear all of that is very, very difficult. But whenever you start the process and get used to letting things out of your mind as they come in, and letting those thoughts go as they happen, it then carries over into other areas like what she's talking about here. It's like you're able to then see things that happen to you and let it go, and then make a choice as to what you're going to do about that without it impacting your mental state. Like, that's essentially what you're shooting for, at least one side of it. There's a lot more to it, of course, but that's one aspect of it. I don't do this. I've done it in the past, but there are other areas of this book we'll talk about that I think are part of this and are connected to this in some ways, but I'm not going to go there yet.
Sure.
But I could see why you want to bring this up yet again. Do we need to do like another whole book on meditation now?
No, I don't think so. But maybe if you want us to talk about it, go vote for something. I don't know, 10% happier, whatever.
Sure.
But she chains these things together in a way that makes a lot of sense for me. She says that traditional thinking, something happens and the brain chooses the appropriate emotion based on the thing that happens, and then that influences what we do. And that's wrong. She says reality is that something happens and then we act. So we get to choose how we respond with our action. And after that, the brain puts the pieces together and fires the emotion. So if I can recognize this thing is happening, step one, and this is what I'm going to do about it, maybe I don't have to let the emotions run wild, and then I have to try to get that wild horse back inside the fence.
Sure.
So that's the new part of this that made sense to me is, mindfulness meditation. I recognize this thing happened and I choose not to get stressed out about it. I activate maybe cognitive reappraisal she talks about in this chapter, where you're ascribing new meanings to actions. So one example she gave is, I'm feeling very nervous about a presentation I have to give. Well, I could reframe that instead of nervousness as excitement. And now that's a positive feeling. And I don't dread that feeling anymore. I don't think it's quite that simple, but I like that idea.
I bet it could be.
It could be, yeah.
The hard part of that, though, like the reframing part, to me, that's the easy piece. Maybe it's hard for some, but it's not going to instantly change your mindset, at least not the first time. But over time, it will.
Mm-hmm.
But the hardest part about that is realizing that you're nervous.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that. Like that to me is the hard part. Like just being able to say, this is what I'm feeling right now. Like think about the name of this chapter, Thinking with Sensations. A lot of what she gets to, like she shows some research about like how people could sense what was going on, and they could measure that the person could sense which deck of cards had positive rewards and which ones had negative rewards. But they could measure the sensations in your fingers faster than you could articulate what was going on and that there even was a pattern. Your fingers knew there were a pattern, but you didn't.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't express that. So being able to express it is the hard part in this case.
Yeah, I don't know what exactly to expect from this, but this is right in the first chapter, right? So already I feel like I've got my money's worth from this book. Well, let's move on to the next chapter because we got lots of them. Thinking with Movement. As soon as I read this title, I thought of Joe Bulig in his walks around his property.
Yep.
The basic idea here is that we think better when we're moving. One thing that I liked from this section, I think I sort of understood this before, but she articulates everything really, really well with lots of great stories and lots of great science if you want to dig into all the research. But fidgeting can help you think better. And why is that? I've always kind of been a fidgeter. It drives some people crazy. I've kind of learned to control it. So like I'll just bounce my knee like on the chair underneath my desk. No one will see that. But I've done this for as long as I can remember. And what that does when you are fidgeting, she gave it a name that I didn't realize before. It's embodied self-regulation. So I guess the big takeaway from this is you are controlling something in your environment. You are forcing yourself to do low intensity movement, which increases your focus and your productivity. And there are cognitive benefits that are associated with that.
I move all the time. Drives people crazy. I have you're talking about bouncing your knee and stuff. It's a flippy chain is what it's called, that I keep in my pocket at all times. And this silly little thing, I keep it in my pocket because it's small and it lays flat. That way it doesn't look like some big, massive something. And whenever I'm walking, or it doesn't seem to matter. Like a lot of times I've got that thing out, or I have it in my pocket and I'm just, flipping it over and such. So I have that thing around at all times. I've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 different fidget toys sitting here on my desk. Like they're all over the place.
Got my fidget cube right here.
I'll have, I've got one here. I've like constantly playing with a pen, like always got something in my fingers. And like, this is where ADHD actually came up a few times in this book, which I was not expecting. And she's referencing like what is going on and why ADHD people do certain things. And she's spot on with those. So kudos on that. But one thing, like thinking with movement, she refers to people who would do walks, doctors who would review images while on a treadmill, and they were more accurate in diagnosing things. Like there's a whole bunch that goes on with this. And it made me think about our middle daughter, so Rose, who is kind of struggling with school stuff, especially math, and seems to be fighting quite a few things with school. And she has some things that she picks up on very quickly and other things that just over her head and it doesn't seem to register at all. And it made me wonder about, like, maybe I should get her to go for a quick run before she comes back and does school or take something with her and do it while she's walking out in the trails or something. Like, I don't know what that is, but getting her to move while she's doing something, maybe that would help out with some of that, helping her to retain that. Those were some of the pieces I was thinking through. So I do have an action item with this one of just kind of walk through that with Becky and see, maybe there's something there that would help her with some of her school stuff. So
I like
don't
that.
know, but
one of the
it
things
makes sense to me.
Stood out
The science
to
that
me
she shares
from
here is
this
really hard to
section
refute.
Yeah. Traditionally, we've believed that we should use breaks to rest the body, but that's actually wrong. Back to your action item. And students who incorporated movement remembered 76% of material compared to only 37% without was one study that she shared there. And that makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to figure out how I can do that more. And like you said, it's not just the knowledge work piece of this. Where my brain instantly went was if I could figure out how to have walking meetings, I feel like they would be much more effective. Not quite sure how to do that yet because every time I've tried it, I'm walking around some place and then like if I were to as I do my walks around downtown, if I were to do that in a meeting, people would hear like the trucks on the street and stuff like that as I'm getting to the path. Oh, what was that? It's distracting. You don't want to put people in that situation. So I don't have an answer to that yet, but that's where I'm thinking. The other thing that I really liked about this is she flat out calls out taking a break to check news or social media. That's the worst thing that you can do because that engages the same brain regions and uses the same mental capacity that you use when you're doing your cognitive work. So it's not really a break at all.
So don't do that.
Don't do that. But I have done that.
It's also toxic, so stop. Oh, yes. Stay off the news. Nothing good happens in the news.
Yep. It's not news for me. I think I have traditionally used those breaks as the time that I would check Twitter, which is social media. So maybe I got to figure out a different way to do that. I don't know. I'm still thinking that over. I don't have an action item associated with that specifically, but the next chapter is thinking with gesture, essentially talk with your hands. 2019 study showed that company founders who mastered gestures were 12% more likely to get funding, which is kind of interesting.
I thought that was fascinating. Like, oh, if I move my hands around and squat up and down while I'm talking, hey, guess what? I'll get more money.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a huge percentage. So kind of it's like, well, maybe they're just better communicators. Maybe there's other aspects of communication that they're better at, but I don't think that's really the case. I think gestures are obviously a big part of communication. Yeah, and maybe there's a little bit of bleed over, but I don't know. My first thought was to kind of discount that statistic, and then the more I thought about it, like, no, it's valid. And then also 12% doesn't seem like a lot. But when you're talking about whether you're going to get millions of dollars of funding or not, you're gonna do everything in your power to make sure that the chips fall in your favor. So this is not an insignificant lever that you could pull.
Yeah, I could get $10 million or $11 million if I move my hands around a lot. Like that's what we're talking about. So move your hands around a lot. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
But it's not just like, it's not simply move around. Like it's intentional gesturing. Like whenever you're talking about something
true
really wide, spread your arms out. When you're talking about something tall, put your hand up above your head. Like you have these things that you can do. And it does help even with kids. Like if you're able to talk through things with kids and use gestures that make sense to them, like it can help them as well. It's just a social thing. But at the same time, it does help you process your own thoughts better as well. So there's that piece of it too. So use gestures. That's what I got from this. I don't really know how to take that as an action item, but don't sit on your hands.
Well, one way that you could apply it would be for all of the video stuff that you do. And I'm talking to the general you at this point, not you specifically, Joe Bulig. But if you do stuff on video, make sure that you incorporate some sort of gestures into your video communication. I was forced to do this a couple of years ago when I started doing some of the talking head videos for the Suite Setup with like the Mastering Mind Maps course that we put together. And obviously the Obsidian one, the whole PKM section, I shot that here in my office. And so I remember the first time that I did it, I felt really, really awkward recording it in Kansas City, and Sean and Isaac are there watching me do it, and I feel like they're just watching me make a fool of myself with my hands because my gestures aren't really lining up. It was really it kind of threw me from what I was trying to present off of the scripts. And so we had to do it a couple of times, but it really wasn't that big a deal. I remember Isaac and Sean were kind of impressed because we were able to get through basically 2 takes of each script. And we had set aside like 4 hours to do it. We got it done in 2. And I was thinking about that afterwards, and I made the connection that the gestures maybe contributed to me being able to read off of the scripts effectively. And obviously the scripts, I'm writing them myself, so it's not somebody just feeding me something. This is stuff that I've written in the first place. I've internalized these concepts, and kind of what I've discovered is that the scripts being on the teleprompter, that allows me to ad-lib a little bit because I know what is coming. But I have been trying to get better with my gestures as I do each of these courses on video. I feel like I am getting better, and I can get through most of those scripts now in a single take.
Nice.
And so when she says people who gesture as they teach on video speak more fluently and articulately and make less mistakes, I was like, oh, that's kind of what happened.
Yeah. When you're doing it on screen, though, like you also have to keep in mind like how wide the camera can see.
It's true. Yep.
Like that's why so many of us make sure there's like a spot monitor or something to where we can see ourselves. Because if I'm spreading my hands out and trying to show something wide, like if you ever see me do that on screen, you see me stop with my hands at the edge of the screen.
Yeah.
Whereas if I were to do it and we were in person and having a conversation, my arms are going to go full length, but you can't see my hands when I do that on screen because the camera's so close. So there's like the whole awareness of what the other person can see on screen. That's why you need to be able to see yourself on the screen when you're doing this. That's my vote. Some people say you should never watch yourself. Like, no, that is wrong. You should always see yourself.
I agree with that. Yeah. Cool. The next section here is part 2, thinking with our surroundings. The first chapter in this section is thinking with natural spaces. Basically, get out in nature and you'll think better.
Yep.
Some startling statistics in here, by the way. On average, we only spend 7% of our time outside. Most Americans report spending less than 5 hours outside per week, 60% of Americans. And even though when you get out in nature, there is more information that is being thrown at you, she makes the argument in this chapter that your brain is built to handle that type of information. There's 2 different kinds of attention. There's passive attention and then there's voluntary attention. So the passive attention that you give, the effortless stuff, the floats from topic to topic, like that's the kind that's evoked by nature. And the voluntary attention, this is the one that takes effort, yet has to constantly be directed. And the example she gives here is like navigating an urban environment. So if we get out in nature, we can make this a lot easier on ourselves.
Do I really need to say anything here? You could probably guess what I'm going to say.
There's lots of different things that she suggests here, from having windows to green plants in your office. So I don't know, is there anything specific that you wanted to do about this, or is just going outside for your walks every day, that's enough for you?
Well, given how much time I'm able to spend out, I mean, even simple things like I need to go mow the yard. Like, well, that means I'm going to be outside for 3 hours. If I'm going to go feed the cats, well, guess what? I'm going outside and it's going to take me 15 minutes to do that because of the distance to walk to and from the places. So like me trying to make sure I have extra time to go outside, like I don't think that's going to be necessary, especially after we move. But something that this had me like processing, and I don't know if I've worked through this on Bookworm before, but the history that I have with being outside is that like I grew up in areas where there were thousands of acres around us. There were miles of timber and all sorts of nature that was around us. It was not built up at all. As my father-in-law affectionately says, it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. And it's a ways out there, but that's what I grew up with. Well, then ended up moving up near the Twin Cities and working in corporate over the span of a few years after that. And I didn't realize it until a couple years into that my stress levels were slowly ratcheting up over time. And even Becky has commented that even lately, since being able to work on a house and being outside regularly, those stress levels have been coming down quickly, despite the fact that we're doing a massive remodel on a very tight time frame. So it doesn't make sense, but yet it seems to make sense. Now, I can't give you all of the why behind that as to what causes that, other than something to do with the background noise and what's around us and built structures not allowing your brain to calm down. Like, there's something along those lines, which she tries to get into somewhat here, but I think I can put a lot of pieces together, but there's not like a this is what causes that scenario.
Sure.
So anyway, go outside. That's what I continually say.
Yeah, there is a whole aspect of this. I think if you and I are in different situations, maybe there's a different conversation that we have about this, about I'm going to bring some plants to my cubicle or something.
Yeah.
Because she does kind of talk about that. She's got this whole term, biophilic design, which is incorporating nature into homes, schools, and workplaces. But I can get outside. I don't live out in the country as much as you do, but even so, in my suburban neighborhood, the trail that I go for a run on, it goes out into the country. There's like this tree bridge that you go under, and as it's just starting to get to fall, some of the leaves are starting to turn. It's my favorite spot. And I'm out there multiple times a week, so I don't have to go very far to get to it. But I don't think that's true for everybody.
No, not at all. I wish it was.
Yeah, me too. But that does kind of lead into the next chapter. Chapter 5 is thinking with built spaces. So this is kind of where she's making the case that we should pay attention to the space that we live and work. And at the beginning, she says that our culture doesn't hold our environment in high regard, and thoughtful design takes time and money. So people just kind of disregard it and I'll just make it work. Plus, I don't want to work with an architect or designer because I know somebody who was an architect or designer and they were hard to work with. So I'm just going to avoid that whole thing. Not me personally. Like, that's the argument she's saying. She actually says architects and designers themselves are part of the problem with this.
Nice. Good job, team.
But I like this chapter. I think the easy summation of this is think about your environment. Think about the pictures that you hang on the wall in your office, which I didn't kind of realize I was doing this as I finished off this office where I'm recording this right now. This is in the basement of my house, but I kind of intentionally chose every single aspect of this. The colors I really like, the specific pictures that are hanging on the wall. I've got all the fractures of the projects that I've done hanging there. I've got the pen case, which we've talked about that before, like the pens that are in there. The majority of them are associated with me shipping a project or doing something, and that's a celebration. So I can look at that kind of like a trophy case. Most of the books on the bookshelf behind me are books that we have read. So again, a little bit of a trophy case. And it makes entering into this space and doing the work here a lot easier. But I never really thought about why I was doing all that stuff. It was just, oh, I like this, I'm going to put it here.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I know whenever you're putting together what that space is and knowing how much space you have for that, she gets into that one quite a bit. Like the whole offices with walls into open plan, like that's a big part of this chapter. Having worked in both, I know that I don't really like either for a variety of reasons, and end up with a weird, like, big office that people sometimes come in and work inside here. I don't know, it's kind of weird. But one of the things that, and this was a very minor point in this chapter, and I don't know why it stood out to me, but there was a point she made that music impairs performance.
Yeah.
And like, this is a known, right? Like, if you're listening to rock music, generally there's so much going on with it that it makes it hard for you to focus on, especially creative work. So it's generally not recommended. This is why there are things like brain.fm that will allow you to do like the background noises that aren't actually music per se. There are ways to do this, but generally noise in your headphones is not what you want. And I use noise kind of intentionally there instead of music. But I think that there's maybe something to this. I have for a long time been someone who, whenever I get into a vehicle, especially if I'm borrowing a vehicle from somebody and they have the radio on, then my instinct is to turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. For years, I have just, whenever I go somewhere, I drive in silence all the time. That's what I do. It drives people crazy. And I have had people hop in my car to go somewhere and they're like, "What, where, does your radio not work?" I'm like, "Oh, it works, I think, but I don't ever turn it on." So they'll ask me this question sometimes. So some people are uncomfortable with that, I have found, but that's
Joe,
just
as
normal.
as an Uber or Lyft driver, would be an entertaining an entertaining interaction for sure.
It's true. It's just silent in the car. Anyway, that's what I do. But built spaces, yes. I mean, there are a lot of ways that you can put together a workspace or an office and such. You know, there's it in the past, whenever I worked corporate, at one point they had me on a desk that was about 3.5 feet wide. That was all the space I had. And then right next to me was somebody else with their 3.5 feet. And on the other side, there was somebody else with their 3.5 feet. And it's like, come on.
That would be miserable. Yeah.
So many things that go wrong with that. I mean, I understand the concept where like we can collaborate and we can work on things together. It's like, yes, at times, but most of the time I'm not doing that. So anyway,
right.
It's not universal. Shouldn't be.
I'm glad you brought up walls because she talks about those in this chapter, but they're not always a bad thing. She says they were designed to protect us from the cognitive load of having to keep track of the activities of strangers. And I see this. As I read that, I was thinking back to working at the co-working space. Fortunately, the one that I joined, there's a couple people who have private offices. There's one other person who works from there sometimes. And so most of the time I have the place to myself.
Nice.
But when I am there, I recognize that I'm paying attention to what he's doing. We don't have like call booths that you can pop in when you take a call. And I knew that going into it, but there's like, you go up in the front and pop in your headphones and you take a call. And that's kind of the expectations of the space. Like that's accepted behavior. It's part of the culture of the space and noise levels, yada, yada, yada. Every space has their own way of functioning. But this is not like a academic library where you're expected to work in silence. I knew that going into it, but I still was kind of surprised how he's taking a call. I'm writing an article. And pretty soon I'm paying attention to his call. Not that I'm trying to eavesdrop, not that I'm even interested in what's going on, but that's where my attention and focus goes. And so she kind of explained why that is in this chapter. We're kind of naturally drawn to those conversational elements, the whole social aspect, instead of the focused work that we're trying to get done. But walls can be used, they can be deployed tactically, let's say. So for my office here, I can't, because I don't have any windows. I don't have any natural light. Going back to the previous chapter, there's nothing nature related in my office. So I'm not going to come sit here or work here for 10 hours in a day. I'm going to come in here for short bursts and do focused work. And walls can boost creativity by providing privacy, and they let you kind of experiment unobserved. So I can do that here. No one is peeking in because there's literally no way to get in other than the door that is shut that I'm looking at right now. But I can't stay here forever either. So I don't know. As I read this chapter, I kind of realized the ideal application for me is use this space probably every day, but probably not all day. And so if I'm not going to be here all day, where am I going? I'm not doing work in the rest of the house where the rest of my family is homeschooling. It just doesn't work. So that was kind of an unintended motivation kind of rationalizing after the fact here, I guess, as I'm reading this book for why I felt so good about getting out of the house and going downtown to the co-working space, because I hadn't been doing that for like a year and a half. This is where I worked and I just made it work. And there's only recently that I kind of was thinking like, well, what's the best version of this? And kind of landed on a combination.
Yeah, the wall thing is, I think, super interesting because of the way that it's brought up and talked about, in that like walls allow you to have that private space, and the lack of walls allow you to socialize and connect with other people. And you can see that. I'll have to, like, when we get done with our remodel in the house, I'll have to take a bunch of good pictures and share those, because a lot of what we've done is in the community spaces, the family room, kitchen, dining, kind of living / piano room, is either opened up doorways or taken walls out entirely, so that those are one massive, like, you can see almost that entire first level, save the bathroom. You can see them all from one spot and from just about any other spot in that house. But the moment you go upstairs, there are walls all over the place. Because you need that individual private space for a bedroom.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't realize that that's kind of the path we were headed down until I read this chapter and realized, oh, yeah, well, we want to be able to socialize and collaborate and talk to each other as a family most of the time, but we still need to be able to go to a private space when needed. And you can see that in the way that we're setting up like the dining kitchen area, because like that's kind of where the homeschool stuff will happen. But yet we're setting up a desk for each of the girls in the bedrooms upstairs. That way they are able to do the communal, collaborative homeschool thing together and then go off to their own respective spaces to do their work. It didn't even occur to me that we had designed it that way. It's just, this is kind of what is needed given our kids and our family.
Yeah.
And yet I feel like we've designed that really well, just albeit unintentional.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about this book, I think, is it's not the first in this topic area that we have read. So we've kind of been making moves in this direction, but this book does a great job of pointing out why that thing you tried seems to be working.
Yeah. Yeah.
It creates the motivation to stick with it.
It's kind of going back to chapter 1, right? Being able to articulate what's going on.
Yeah.
Like noticing those sensations and being able to put words to it. Like there are things that just kind of feel right and we just kind of do, and then all of a sudden somebody gives you the terms for it. It's like, oh, that's why I love blue.
Yep. All right, next chapter 6, is thinking with the space of ideas. And this is the one where we're going to talk about connected notes. Let's start by talking about Darwin.
Before you do that, I just want to point out, this is the one and only chapter in this entire book where this can be put together and like that you could legitimately bring this topic up. And I thought this was what most of the book was going to be about.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe that's just me. I thought this one chapter was going to be like the bulk of the whole book. And yet we have this one little tiny, I don't want to say tiny, but this one little piece of it. Anyway, that said, I just needed to get that out there.
You are correct. And I had the thought after reading this chapter, maybe I should go into that bibliography and just start downloading some research reports, because I do want to know more about this particular spot. But even in this, like the thinking with the space of ideas, this isn't all connected notes. But I do want to talk about Darwin, because he existed long before Obsidian, and he said, acquire the habit of writing very copious notes, not all for publication, but as a guide for yourself. And I feel like that is a great summary of PKM in general. One of the things that I learned about PKM when I was doing the research for the Obsidian course was that there has to be an output for personal knowledge management. And when I say personal knowledge management, most people think of, I dump all these notes inside of Obsidian or Rome, and then I make the connections and I see a graph view. That is an aspect of personal knowledge management, but your calendar is personal knowledge management. Knowledge of the appointments that you have today. Your task manager is personal knowledge management. Knowledge of the things that you need to get done. So there's a whole bunch of different aspects of this that pertain to you thinking about what you should be doing at any given moment. And then the other aspect of that with the extracting maximum value from your ideas, this is the part that is fascinating to me. And one of the elements of that I discovered is you have to have an output. That doesn't mean it has to be a video that you make, a podcast you record, or a blog post that you publish. It means that you have to take the information that you receive and synthesize it somehow, put your own stamp on it, which is why Bookworm is so awesome, because we read these books and we can't just say, oh, well, on page whatever, they said this. We mention that occasionally because we want to riff off of some of the points that they make. I had somebody ask me one time, like, do you have to do anything like copyright wise for Bookworm? And it caught me off guard. Like, why would we have to? Oh, because we're talking about the books? Well, we don't really talk about them, like summarizing them for somebody, sort of like a Blinkist sort of a deal. We're engaging in conversation about the ideas that they present. And so 99% of the material is our own.
Right. Or critiquing theirs, yes.
Yes. And that thought never even occurred to me. So TLDR, bringing this back, I would encourage anybody who is reading books, listening to podcasts, whatever, you're taking notes in some way, shape, or form. Don't just collect the points that somebody else is saying. Force yourself to think about what this means for you. And then even if the only output is you write an opinion summary about what you have just consumed information-wise, that's enough. I can't even tell you the number of times I've gone into one of those MOC notes and I've collected all the bits and pieces and I'm tossing them around. What does this mean? And the moment that I force myself to start typing on the keyboard, I crystallize my thoughts about the topic at hand. I remember something you said from a Bookworm episode a long time ago, and I don't remember what it was from, but thoughts disentangle themselves through lips and pencil tips.
Yep.
Clicky keyboards too, turns out.
I'm not sure I would go quite that far. Maybe it would. Maybe it does, I suppose. You're externalizing your thinking. I know, and I knew whenever I saw the space of ideas as the chapter title, I knew this is where you were going to go with this. And yet, as I was processing this chapter and reading through it, it, of course, is the process of thinking externally and, trying to put your thoughts together in some form outside of your brain. And it does go beyond that. Like she does dive into what is the environment for developing ideas as well. Like she does kind of go into that. But I wasn't certain, because some of the stories and ideas that she shares here involve a lot of, again, externalizing your thinking, but not on a computer. Like a lot of those were whiteboards and Post-its and index cards. Like that concept was a lot of what was referred to writing in a notebook. Like the process of physical movement was a part of those. Mm-hmm. Going back to chapter 2, like thinking with movement, that piece came up quite a bit here. I don't think it was necessarily intentional. Maybe it was, but it did come up quite a bit. So it just kind of made me ask the question. I don't think she would say this, but it made me ask if screens count as part of that space for ideas. And partially I say that because you can't always see it all at once unless you have lots of big screens and you have views that allow you to see tons of things all at once. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily required. Obviously, I'm going to be the skeptic coming at this particular piece. You could see that one coming a mile away. But this is just a thing that it makes me wonder about, because I don't do what you're talking about, Mike. I spend most of my time processing those things mentally or talking to myself as I'm walking outside. Like those are the places that I do that type of connection. And I don't write out my thoughts in something like Obsidian just because I don't have the time to do that, especially right now.
Sure.
If I tried to write out all my thoughts on how I wanted to do things in the house, like I would spend just as much time typing out my thoughts on how I wanted to do it on the house as opposed to actually doing it or trying a few things. So I'm not going to do that. It takes too long. So I applaud the people who have the time to do that. And, generally it helps people and they talk about the benefits of it. I just don't see that personally, because obviously I want to be able to see things physically and move them around physically in a lot of cases,
Mm-hmm.
not just clicking a mouse and moving a file around. That, to me, that doesn't seem to equate.
Yes.
Okay, I'll get off the soapbox now.
Well, let me respond by sharing two things. Number one, I have an action item to think on paper.
What?
So there is
Totally. Are you okay? Are
Yeah.
you sure?
there is definitely an element of truth to what you are talking about. However, the second thing I will say is that there is a point on my outline here, big key idea from what she talked about in this chapter of concept mapping. A concept map is visual representation of facts and ideas and of the relationships between them. And yes, a concept map could be a graph of all those little dots, and you could have them color-coded, how they link together. But the thing that stood out to me with concept mapping is what you were talking about, taking those things and moving them around. The absolute best way I have found to do that, the most delightful way I know, is creating a mind map on an iPad and dragging the nodes around with my finger, not my Apple Pencil, although I do that sometimes too, but being able to physically touch the idea and move it somewhere else and have it snap into place in a different section of the mind map, that is, I think, a very valid approach to doing this. As we are recording this, I am waiting for my iPad mini to arrive. I am so excited about this iPad mini specifically because it's the size of an A5 notebook. My plan is whenever I go anywhere, I'm grabbing my notebook and I'm grabbing my iPad mini. And I don't know yet how that is going to work, but that is the dream, is that I've got both the analog and the digital and I can use the right tool in the right way. But I think both of them can be used to, as she's talking about in this chapter, think with the space of ideas effectively.
Now, can I marry a whole bunch of things that I've said and talked about in the past? Because this chapter made me think about this, especially since I read this after the Apple event, okay? Because I don't own an iPad, and in my world, I've never had a legitimate use case for an iPad. However, the mini that you're talking about, with the speed that comes with it and being able to touch and move things around, if there's one thing that would change a lot of this, if I could physically write in Obsidian and interconnect those notes in Obsidian that I have handwritten, that would change the game. That would change a lot of things, because then it allows me to physically move and touch and feel a screen, piece of glass, but the representation there being moving those ideas around.
Yeah.
That I could see, but that feature set doesn't exist yet. I think we're close. I mean, a lot of those dots are very close to being connected, but we're not there yet. And once that piece is put together, once I can write without any lag, and once I'm able to somehow take those handwritten notes and then do the interconnected piece, yeah, now we've got a different conversation, because that becomes a different feature set that we don't have currently, and you're able to marry up a lot of what I tend to promote with pen and paper setups with the interconnectedness stuff that you're talking about with Obsidian. Like, we start to put those two together, now we got a different level of thinking that's possible.
Yep.
That's what I'm waiting on, but it doesn't exist, thus Joe doesn't have an iPad on order.
Yeah, I think it's moving in that direction, and there will be a point in the near future where you're able to do that. I mean, some of that stuff it exists, just not in Obsidian specifically. Like the scribble feature, you can write in apps, have it converted into text. Why can't Obsidian do that? It's a matter of time. It's a system level feature. They'll add that.
Yep.
There are plugins in Obsidian to do what I was talking about with the mind maps, where you can write something down. It's a node. Now you can drag that to a different spot, and the mind map updates. So it's not super elegant, but I think we're gonna get there. Like you, when I was thinking about the iPad, I kind of felt like there doesn't exist a spot for the iPad in my day-to-day workflow, which is kind of bizarre to me because I use it 3 times a week for sketch notes. Like I have a whole series of videos that I created on my website, which are these sermon sketch notes. So I have a legit use case for it. Yet I don't think about that because that's kind of the only time that this is the right device for what I want to do.
Yep.
It's not a great computer for typing. I have that keyboard folio case on my 11-inch iPad Pro, but I never want to use that keyboard, so I never want to write with it. I never want to do any of the other things that I do on my Mac with it. It's literally just the analog stuff. It's the sketch notes. And so I wrote an article for the Screencast Online magazine, which is going to be out for next month, of the different ways that I am excited about this smaller form factor. I feel this is the thing that's going to make this click for me. When I'm doing research for a podcast, when I'm working on the outline for Bookworm, stuff like that, this is the perfect form factor where it's small enough I can just take this and sit on the couch and do it, and it's going to be better than doing it on my phone, which is what I did today for the Bookworm outline. So I tend to do this sort of stuff on the go, but the iPad is just too big, it's too heavy, it's too clunky, even at the 11-inch size for me to want to use it frequently. But that small A5 notebook size, I love that. And I'm excited about the different hybrid analog, maybe we'll call that. So I've got my hybrid bullet journal, which is not a bullet journal. I've got my hybrid iPad, which I'm not going to use like an iPad. I'm just one of these weird birds, I guess. But I do like the idea of being able to use the Apple Pencil with that, and kind of what you're talking about with Obsidian. That is the dream for me as well.
I think if that becomes a thing, like I could see doing my entire bullet journal setup in an iPad mini. Like I could totally see that. But again, you have to let me connect things, like connect my handwritten notes somehow. And it has to be clean, and don't overcomplicate it. Like everybody wants to overcomplicate it. Like just make it simple and let me run with that. If that exists already, somebody please reach out to me on Twitter or something and let me know. But it doesn't have to be in Obsidian. Like I'm going to want, you know me, I'm going to want the image files or text files, and I'm going to want access to that. But if there's something like that exists, like I will have an iPad on order very quickly.
Cool. Let's move on to the last part here, part 3, thinking with our relationships. And the first chapter in here is chapter 7, thinking with experts. This is basically a case for getting ideas from people who know a bunch of stuff. And there are some interesting examples here of imitators, which kind of harkens back to The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. The person who's first is usually not the successful one. It's the imitator. And there's a statistic here that imitators' cost is typically about 60 to 75% of the innovator's cost. So it costs them less, and they're able to learn from the mistakes and things like that. But the thing that I thought about with this is you're thinking with experts. So just that definition, if I'm going to apply this and think with experts, I need to surround myself with people who know more than I do. And I'm going to get on my soapbox for a moment here and make the case that you should be reading more books. I was thinking back about the last several years and how I have grown, and a large percentage of that personal growth I can attribute to this podcast and forcing myself to sit down and read the books, even the ones I didn't really want to read. But I think just the ability that we have to allow someone to speak into our life for $20 and Amazon will get it here by tomorrow, people don't realize how much value there is in that. And it kind of is shocking to me as I'm thinking about people that I know who, if I go to a conference and some big name person is there, they want an audience with that person. They'll do anything they can to get a couple of minutes alone with this expert and ask a question because they might get the answer. But that person has probably also written a book and given you the answer. You just have to learn how to look for it. And Yeah, it makes me sad to think about how there's so many people, and I'll put myself in this category too, where we don't know what we don't know, and the answer already exists. And if we would just access the information that is available to us, we don't even have to spend the money to buy the books off of Amazon most of the time. We can go to the local library and get it ourselves. It's right there. It's just not blatantly obvious. And so a lot of people won't dig. And again, I'm putting myself in this category where, it's too much effort. Really, if you could see what sort of impact that would have, you would be all over it. But you can't see that far into the future to see how things are going to be different. It's only when you look back, like we have over 129 episodes of this, and I can see, where I was when I started, where I am now, and how that has helped me. That provides the momentum to keep going. So don't wait 3 years to wish you had read more books. Just read more books.
Simple. Just, sit down and read. Super simple. What's the, people talk about they want to be the first in a field. Like, I want to be the first one to come up with a brand new idea. Like, no, the people who are successful are second.
Yep.
It happens in every industry in some form or another.
You want to be a fast second.
It's common. Yes. You see something, you realize it could be big, you see what their core fundamental problem is and why the first person of the industry isn't doing it right. You fix that problem, and then you take off. Oreos are that way. Ford Motor Company is that way. Like, we could give you all sorts of examples here.
Apple and Xerox, they talk about in this chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. So even Apple's stuff is stolen. So, like, this is not, being first is not what you're after. Fast second is what you're after. And a quick way to do that is consume things from people who are the experts as frequently as you can, and take audience with them as much as you can. And given the age that we live in, it's very easy to do that. Like, this morning I was learning some things from Elon Musk because I thought it was interesting. And that is not something you used to be able to do. Like, you didn't used to be able to talk to the CEO or learn from the CEO of a major company who's breaking all the rules. Like, you didn't used to be able to learn from them. Well, you can do that now.
Yeah.
Because they interview, they're on podcasts, they're, creating their own media, they're coming up with things all over the place, and they're, on the media somewhere. You can go learn from them. And that's a huge benefit if you're willing to use the tools at your disposal for that purpose, and not just killing a couple hours because you're tired and want to go to bed.
Yeah, learning is not just consuming information, though, because there is no shortage of information. It's forcing yourself to decide, like we already talked about, what does this mean to me? But when you go through that additional step, which is honestly not that much more additional work, that's where all the value comes in. But if all I did was write down notes from all of these books that we read and stored them somewhere. Like, I used to do this inside of Evernote. You have all this text that you can go back and you can search, but it doesn't give you any day-to-day value. You're not bumping up into it again until you have the thought, I need to go find this thing, and then you can go retrieve it. But I want to have this stuff impact my day-to-day thinking. And so that is a little bit different here. Also, going back to the quality of the information that you collect, I'm reminded of an audiobook that I listened to one time. I won't say read, because listening to an audiobook is not reading. And it's The Art of Exceptional Living by Jim Rohn. And the reason that I listened to it is that it did not exist in a printed format. It was just a CD. But one of the things that he said in that, I've listened to it probably a dozen times. I kept it in my car because I listened to it over and over again because it was just so good. But there was one thing he said in there that really stuck with me. He said that 3 questions that you should ask about the people in your life. Number 1, who am I allowing to speak into my life? Number 2, what effect is that having on me? Number 3, is that okay? If you ask those 3 questions honestly about most social media, and I will say without fail, absolutely 100% Facebook. You would not use it anymore. Because it's making you more angry, it's making you more anxious, it's making you more stressed out. I mean, there are research studies just as we record this, this week, that articles have run about how Facebook is linked to higher teenage suicide rates. It's a proven thing. The algorithm is evil. Get away from that junk. But we've trained ourselves like this is what we do. So when you have to label the inputs in your life as either good or bad, it's a lot easier to let stuff go as opposed to, oh, this is just what I do. If you don't have to make a value judgment, you can just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you can kind of hope and wish that things get better, but you're not really going to be motivated to do anything about it. And I have totally been in that place, so I empathize with people who are stuck there. That's also one of the reasons I did that action item. If you remember back in the day where I rated all of my relationships.
Yes. I hope that's still buried
from
somewhere.
plus to minus. Yeah, it's just recognizing what's really going on and trying to tip the scale more towards the positive.
Yes. And I am convinced that books are the way to go.
Absolutely.
So 2 things. I'm going to give you an action item, dear listener. Buy books and listen to Bookworm. Those are your two tasks. Those are the things you need to do. Okay? Do that. You'll be set.
You can listen to Bookworm first as a filter to decide which books are worth really reading, but then go back and read the books. Or if you want, you can read along with us, because internet's largest book club, asterisk. Like the bookmarks say.
Yes. And the thing here is that you should know, like, we talk about a lot of the big points in these books, but there's a lot that we don't cover in most books.
Yeah, there's so much more.
So just need to say that.
Chapter 8, Thinking with Peers. This one is interesting, I guess. This chapter kind of made me sad, to be honest, because the big thing from this that stood out to me is that you should fight as if you're right and listen as if you're wrong. And I read that and I'm like, yes, totally. And then I get sad because how do you implement that in a company culture if you're not at the very top?
Interesting. That's fascinating that you have that perspective, because I like you're saying yes, talk and fight like you're right, and then listen like you're wrong. I feel like I do that a lot, and I didn't realize that I did that a lot. Again, this is another one of those, I didn't know this was happening, but I do this with my boss quite a bit, and then the upper leadership that are above him, I do it quite a bit with them, and it seems like it changes things over time. Like it seems like it has that impact. Now, I don't know if that's a factor of the specific culture that I'm sitting in, or if that's a more universal thing. I don't know. I would assume it's not universal, but I don't know. I don't have a clean answer on that one, but.
Well, let me clarify a little bit here, because I think you can implement this in varying degrees. So I would argue that I do this as well too. However, when I read that, I was like, yes, this needs to be like a company core value. It needs to be explicitly written.
Sure.
Every single meeting, everyone comes in with this in mind. Because if you are clear about that, then I feel you minimize the chances of people's feelings getting hurt. And I have been in situations where that has been communicated explicitly, but it is not common, I feel. However, there's tons of value that comes from this. The example that she uses in this chapter of Brad Bird and John Walker, they are famous for fighting openly at Pixar. People will hear them yelling at each other. And when I read that, I was like, wow, that would be a cool company culture if that was acceptable, but everybody also knew that it was healthy. I've been in companies where that happens and it's not healthy, and it's just kind of, oh, let's just pretend that didn't happen. But when it's recognized that this is part of the creative process, and that's really the goal here, is You have people who are working off of each other, not just trying to dominate and get their own way, but this is part of the process, and we all agree that the end result here is going to be better because of it. There was another book we read, and I can't put my finger on the title, but they talked about the Wright brothers fighting like this all the time. And then they would come back the next day and be, oh, you were right.
But both of them would say that, yes.
Yes, exactly. It wasn't just a single personality constantly getting their way because the other one went home and realized it was eating them up and didn't want to upset things at Thanksgiving. It was just, this is the deal, and we're going to work this process.
It's a good point to bring up. I've dealt with this one specifically a lot in our house remodel because we're on such a tight time frame. I've had a lot of people come help and have asked a lot of people to help, and I've been very specific about who I asked to help on what thing, because I know like different people have different skill sets, right? I can invite just about any person over to help hold a beam in place, but I have specific people I'm going to ask over to help me with electrical. Like this is very intentional. However, whenever I have had some folks over to help, like there are sometimes details on how something should be done that we disagree on. And granted, it's my house, so I have the last say on that. But I always want to make sure that we're both on the same page when we're doing these things. And more often than not, one or the other of us, in almost every case that this has happened, has just said, let's go work on something else and come back to this one. Like that's kind of a thing that people in construction I know do. It's like, I can't figure this out right now. I either need to go home for the night or go work on something completely different and come back to it. And almost every single time, actually in this case, I think it's every single time when we've come back to it, it's always been, no, we should do it your way. And both of us are saying that.
Yeah.
And they're completely different people. So yes, I feel like that's a very common thing that can happen, at least in healthy relationships. That's a lot of what happens. But it's been fascinating to me to see that come about.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it is kind of sad. I feel, at least my personality type, that the default is to avoid that sort of conflict. I'm a people pleaser by nature. So unless I go into it knowing explicitly that the rules allow and actually encourage this sort of thing, I tend to not want to go there. And then sometimes I'll suppress it for so long that eventually I'll just say it, and that's where I also get into trouble, where now I have an unhealthy attachment to this thing because I have brewed on it for so long that I'm actually fighting just to get my way. The better way to do it is like you're talking about. We have these strong opinions, strong convictions, lightly held.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, last chapter, not the very last part of the book because there is a conclusion, but chapter 9 is thinking with groups. I thought this chapter was interesting. There's some cool team building type stuff in here. There's a whole section on how to generate groupiness. She talks, that's the term she uses. If we need to work together, we should learn together, we should train together, we should feel together, we should engage in rituals together. And it just makes me sad to think about all of the asynchronous work that tries to happen in all of these silos, especially with COVID and a lot of people working remote for the first time. You lose a lot of this sort of stuff. And I feel a lot of people don't even realize how things are different yet, maybe, but it's not good. There's a lot of that intangible stuff that you don't realize how much it makes a difference until it's maybe too late.
This is the piece of COVID remote work ramifications that I don't think we've fully understood quite yet.
Yep.
People who have worked in remote companies usually have one of two responses. One, this is amazing, and I can work whenever I want, and the async thing means that I can share my thoughts whenever I'm ready. That's usually one response. The other is there are no people in my life, and I have no real connection with the people that I'm working with. For some folks, that's exactly what they want. I would venture to say that for most people, that's not helpful. This is why I think there are a number of companies that over time that are now, who have tried remote work and then have just rejected it entirely as a result. Now, I say that knowing this is what you do, right, Mike? And
It's true.
I know that I have done this in the past. I have been in a lot of scenarios where remote work was the way things were done because it's not possible for me to fly to China or Canada or South Africa to meet with my clients. Like, it's just not possible. So those are things that I know are restrictions, right? But there is something to be said for like working together and having those rituals and having those routines together. And as much as we talk about how we don't like meetings, like I have a weekly staff meeting that I go to, but there's a whole ritual that goes with that and a routine. Now, granted, it can last an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, but that's the time at which we connect as people and do a lot of things other than just talk about business at church. Like, we'll celebrate birthdays. We'll grab donuts or cake or something. Like, that's part of it. We may spend 30 minutes talking about what we're doing for vacations for the summer. Like, that sort of thing does happen as part of that. So there's a lot more to it. But if that staff meeting were to go away, I know that I wouldn't connect with my coworkers near as much as what I do now. So
Right.
there is that piece. So as much as remote work has had its promotion and its heyday, part of me feels like we're on the edge of wondering whether or not that's the way we should be going in the future. And I say that knowing that that's becoming the norm right now.
Yeah. So interesting story from this section here regarding the synchronous movements. You're probably not doing synchronous movements in your staff meetings, but
No.
maybe you are. If you are, they'd probably be better.
Maybe.
But one of the things that she calls out is that those synchronous movements flip the switch from I thinking to we thinking. And I loved this concept. As I was reflecting on this, I was thinking about my middle school soccer coaching experience. I'm coaching my sons. One of them is in 8th grade. One of them is in 6th grade. And they're both homeschooled, but there's kind of like a co-op sort of a thing that has sports teams. So we actually have a team that plays other small schools in the area. And most of the soccer teams that we play are 7th and 8th grade, just boys. We are 5th through 8th grade, boys and girls. A majority of the kids on the team have never played before. We do have some very talented players, but we also have this thing where everybody gets to play, both halves. And we've got 22 kids, which means that the good players aren't in all the time. So different coaching philosophies, larger pool of kids and younger kids that we're drawing from means the beginning of the year, we were getting smoked. Our first game we lost, I think 5-1. Second game was like 12-1. And after that second game, I didn't realize the value of this, but I had to step in. The head coach, actually, someone in his family was dealing with COVID, so they had to quarantine for a couple of weeks. Basically means I was running everything as the assistant coach. The scenario I had worked so hard to avoid, here I was.
And you're on the second game.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. So the very next game, I picked a couple of the 8th grade boys. Basically, the 8th graders. There's 3 8th graders on the team. So they're the older kids. I made them the captains, and I made them lead the whole team in a standard pregame routine, starting with stretches. Believe it or not, before this, they would just like come screw around for a half an hour, start the game. They never did anything together. So they are doing these stretches. The whole team is lining up on the line. They're calling them out. They're counting them out together. And then they go through a couple other like warm-up type drills together. But it's a process, and everybody does it together. And then when I read this, the synchronous movements, I thought about that with the stretching. I'm like, well, stretching is successful. No one has pulled a muscle since the first game when some kid hurt his hamstring, right? But a strange thing has happened over the last several games where we are actually much more competitive than maybe we should be. And as I read this, I'm like, so maybe that stretching, that synchronous movement, that flips the switch at the beginning of the games from I to we, and we end up playing a lot better together. And we still haven't won a game. We've been ahead a couple of times. We've had 2 ties, which honestly, we should have won both of those games. But if you would have told me at the beginning of the year, we would have tied any of the games, I'd be like, no, we're not good enough.
Yeah.
But I am reflecting on that, and I'm thinking that actually probably has a lot more to do with the success than how good I am as a coach in terms of teaching soccer ability.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me that whenever you can figure out how to work together as a group, it makes a big, big difference. So,
Yep.
Kudos on you. Kudos on the stretching.
Thanks. There's another thing I wanted to touch on with this section on thinking in a group. There's a couple of specific, I guess, tips you could say, but I don't think she framed them as that. Number one, if you are a leader, don't tell anybody what you think. Because she says that as soon as the leader makes his or her preferences known, everyone else engages in self-silencing. I've totally seen this, and I've been guilty of this myself. And I can think of a couple different groups I'm a part of where I do hold some regular meetings, and kind of the big takeaway for me is just start the meeting and then ask people what they think. And even if there's a big, long, awkward silence after that, wait for somebody else to make the first move.
Yep. I remember that from my corporate days. Like, I was very good at awkward silences. Like, I'll wait all day. Like, somebody else is speaking first. I do not care.
Right. And then a couple other just practical things, I think. If you're thinking in a group, have leaders silence themselves. That's the one I was just talking about. Make your thought process visible. So as you are talking about things and deciding on things, if you have to do it via Zoom, have somebody share their screen and document it live. Like, take live notes so that everybody can see what's going on. Create group artifacts. If you're talking through a process, have like a diagram at the end of this is the process or this is the SOP, whatever. Then ultimately, the last one here, identify who is responsible for doing. That part makes sense. If you're going to run an effective meeting, you got to have action items and people responsible for them. But there's another piece to this. Identify who is responsible for doing and knowing what. I feel like this is the one where I've got a lot of room for growth, because I can't even recall the number. There's too many. The number of times we've gotten into a meeting and, well, what did we decide? I don't remember. I thought we wrote it down somewhere. No one really wrote it down because everyone assumed that the other person, this is their project, they're going to take notes on it, whatever. So this is a big takeaway for me, though not a specific action item, just something I want to keep in mind for future meetings is make sure that the knowledge that is being generated by a group, that there's an owner of that as well for the future.
That goes back. I think we talked about this last time. Like, it seems like every little meeting that I have, it's like, okay, here's the thing we talked about. Who's doing what? What moves it forward? Am I doing like, what is the next step that needs taken here? Like, that is just, it's so important.
Yep.
And unless somebody dictates that a decision on what comes next, unless somebody makes that decision, guess what? Nothing happens.
Yeah, it's true. All right, then the last part of this book, the conclusion, let's just touch on this briefly. This is one of the most effective summaries of a book I have ever read. The flow of this goes something like this. Mental extensions can help combat the stereotype threat, which is a temporary condition that saps brain power to those affected, rendering them less intelligent. Extensions are most powerful when deployed in combination. And then she goes on through the 9 principles for mind extending whenever possible, fill in the blank. I don't want to talk for the next 5 minutes without a break, so I'm not going to go through all of those. But, and by the way, the traditional academic system, the way we take tests, that discourages and even eliminates these extensions. So the system is broken, but this is the best way to move forward.
Which is amazing. Like, this is a well-written conclusion, right? Like,
yep.
Here are all the ways that you could think externally. And by the way, here's some ways to help you do that. But the practical what to do about it piece is not belabored and made into an entire part on its own. It is not sprinkled throughout the whole thing either. It's like, here you go. I just gave you a whole bunch of information, and here's your action items.
Yeah.
That's bookworm model to a T right there.
Even the lead into the conclusion is expertly done, because the last story from chapter 9 talks about the public school system in Austin, Texas, and the person who was leading some change there, and then their son is the subject of the story at the beginning of the conclusion. So there's a perfect connection between these. Yeah, like I said, this is one of the best conclusions I think I've ever read, which is why I put it on the outline. There's not just a summary of what she said. There's some new information here, but it builds perfectly on everything that she has mentioned prior to this. Anything else you want to mention about this book before we get into action items?
I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot here. So, no, I'm good.
All right. Well, let's talk about action items then. You want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So I have the one where I want to talk to Becky about our middle child, Rose, and how to maybe help her with movement and such, and maybe some nature stuff to maybe help her with retention on some school things. So I have that as an action item. So I'm going to work through that with Becky. And then, we talked early on with follow-up of like my whole daily routine thing. I feel like a lot of this book sets itself up really well for routine-based action items here, because they're like ongoing type methods. Like, here are ways you should live your life, not here, you need to go use this system for managing your tasks, right? So It is set up to be longer term. So I think what I'm doing is I'm kind of taking some of this and going to see how this incorporates into that daily routine action item that I'm carrying over. So I think we're just going to incorporate some of this into those discussions whenever I'm setting some of that up. So kind of broadening that one and adding some time to it as well. So those are the ones that are standing out to me at the moment. I feel like this one, yes, there could be a lot more action items, and I suspect that you have more than just 2, but I feel like this is one that action items may pop up over time.
Sure.
I don't feel like I've said that before, but this one feels like, okay, here's a whole bunch of information. I feel like this is going to come back, and I'm going to have the tendency to add some things later. So I'm kind of curious when we get to follow up in a couple weeks if there have been any things that have popped up in that time frame. So, But I'm going to start with the 2.
All right. Well, I'm going to blow your mind because I also have 2 action items, which we've talked about both of them already. I do agree that there probably is potential for a lot more with this. But as I was reading this, there were 2 things that I heard, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do that. The first one, meditate for reals.
Yep.
The one I am not looking forward to. The second one, think on paper. So what that means is I've been time blocking my day every day in my notebook. I've got my 5 tasks, up to 5 tasks that I'm going to complete. And I have that all created usually the night before. But I don't really use the rest of the page very often for thinking. I keep it next to my desk. I take notes in it, like when we're recording a podcast, if there's something, an edit point or whatever, something I want to remember. I saw you jotting down some notes. You probably do this too. If somebody's talking about something, I want to go back and talk about that. I'll jot that down in a list. But I don't think on paper. And so I want to spend some time thinking about how I can do that more effectively. I've done it before. I think it's as simple as just making lists and things inside of the notebook, making outlines in there first, not just using it as a capture place, basically. So those are mine. Style and rating, my books. So I'll go first. This is a great book. You should just go buy this book. Go buy and read this book, even if you're not interested in the concepts. I feel coming into this, because we had heard about some of this stuff before, our reaction to it was, oh, this helped me understand why, more frequently than it brought an idea where, oh my gosh, I've never heard this before. I can see a scenario, though, where that is the case. and I would be hard pressed to think of a better resource for a lot of the ideas that are presented here. I can't think of anything I would really recommend higher than this for a lot of those maybe mental inflection points, if that makes sense. If you're coming into this and you're thinking with movement, that's a brand new concept to you. I think she does a great job laying out why you should do that, why you should get outside and go for walks and things like that. Like I said, not brand new to you and me, but it was kind of surprising to me that we both had the same reaction though of, oh, that's why I was doing that. And it creates motivation to keep doing it. So who is this for? Absolutely everyone. In terms of the style, it is the work of a lot of research. It's a very academic book without feeling like that. The stories are very well written. I feel like it is very approachable. Maybe not. She talks in this book about, if you become an expert in something, you forget about all of the beginner steps that you have to go through, you just kind of lump them all together. And so it's hard for somebody who's just coming into something. I do recognize that is a possibility maybe with this, but I still think this is a phenomenal book. I think it's kind of set up, by the way, for a sequel. The very last sentence in here, she talks about the extended mind being connected to the extended heart. I feel like there's a whole book on that. So maybe there's like a whole series that she's going to be getting into with this. It's one of the best books of 2020 on Amazon for a reason. I'm going to rate it 5 stars. The coveted 5-star rating. I don't think there's anything in here specifically that we talked about our action items, but those action items are not going to completely change our lives. Like maybe some other action items you would think when you get done with a book that I would typically rate as 5.0. Oh, that light bulb went on for the very first time. This is something that I'm going to do, and I can already see how this is going to totally revolutionize everything that I do. But I do think, like you said, this is the kind of thing that is going to stick with you, and you're going to make a whole bunch of micro adjustments over time based off of stuff that you have read from this. It's going to impact other things, and you're not going to realize the total value of reading this for a very long time. Kind of like how to read a book. That's what I was thinking about when I was reading this. This is the modern version of how to read a book, and 10 years from now, we're going to go back to this book and say that was the point where all of this stuff kind of clicked for us, but we don't know that for sure until we get to that point. So yeah, 5.0, not just because it's a good book, but because I think it's a very applicable, a very approachable book for just about anybody who would pick it up.
And yet you're rating this one really well and rated How to Read a Book very poorly.
I should probably go back and adjust that rating. Maybe episode 200 we'll adjust some more ratings.
Adjust it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think you have nailed it with some of the style pieces here. Like this thing is very polished. They have spent a long time editing this. She spent a long time writing this. You can tell. This is not something that was whipped up in the span of, 6 months. Like it took time to put this together, and it shows. And the detail at which the subtleties are put together is phenomenal. Like it's just like you were talking about, leading chapter 9 into the conclusion. Like not a lot of authors go through the trouble of trying to set the stories up between sections to connect.
Yeah.
And it seems like every part had a kicker at the end that would lead into the next part. Every chapter within those parts did the same thing. Like it's very well thought out, and I appreciate that. Yes, it's a 3-part, 3-chapter per part thing. We tend to rail on those. This one I think is very justified in that. I'm with you. I absolutely love this thing. I think everybody should read it. And it's dense. It's 250 pages, but it moves fast. Like there's a lot that's covered. There's a lot of science, and yet it's not overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It's got a really good balance in so many ways that I feel like this is very approachable to just about anybody, as long as your reading level is up to that point. So that said, I'll join you at 5.0. Like this is one that people should read. And yes, we covered it here, but There are so many things we didn't talk about.
Yeah.
Like there are books that we cover on Bookworm, and I feel like we have teased out and talked about all the points that you really need out of a book. And at that point, there's really no reason for you to go read it. We've talked about a lot. We've been recording now for an hour and 45 minutes, and I feel like
there's so much more.
There's so much we haven't talked about.
We didn't even get into like why she says articulately that Daniel Kahneman's System 2, System 1 stuff is crap.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She talks about, all like, Carol Dweck is brought up at the beginning, and like grit is brought up. Like, these are all things that we could dive deep on each one of those, and we just completely skipped. Like, there's so much in this, and I love that. I feel like we don't run across books this dense anymore because people are on a deadline and they're out to write a book. They're not necessarily out to share information. And in this case, Annie did not do that. So kudos to Annie. Well done. I can't wait to read your next one. So yes, 5-0 from me.
All right. So let's put the extended mind on the shelf. What is next, Joe Bulig?
The one coming up next, we both don't have in our hands yet because you can't get it in your hands yet, and that is Courage is Calling by Ryan Holiday. It's on pre-order right now, and by the time this releases, you can go order it. So as we're recording it, You can't get it yet, but as it releases, you can, and we'll get it here in about 4 days or so, and then cover that in a couple of weeks. But this is the beginning of what I think is a 4-part series by Holiday, and it's basically talking about fear and how overcoming fear is the route you need to take. I feel like I should leave it there because there's so much I could talk about already, and I don't even have the book in my hands. We've always liked Ryan Holiday, so I'm super anxious to get this one in my hands and start on it.
Cool.
And what are you going to do after that, Mike? I don't know yet. You haven't updated the outline.
Yeah, sorry. I'll save it here in a second. But I, a little bit ago, asked my mastermind group, what is the best book that you have read this year? And one of them that came up definitely sparked interest in me from a bookworm perspective. So that is the one I'm going to pick. And it is A Minute to Think, Reclaim Creativity, Conquer Busyness, and Do Your Best Work by Juliet Funt. I think I have seen Juliet Funt speak at the Entre Leadership Summit, but I can't recall. I can't find the speaker list from when I was there. I think I wrote down her last name wrong, which is why I can't verify this 100%. But I think it's the same person. But this one, actually, I talked to somebody who had interviewed her and said that this was by far one of the best interviews they have ever had. She's super, super smart. And this book comes very highly recommended. Basically, it is very much in alignment with what we do. So I am expecting great things from this book, but we will find out for sure in about a month.
Sweet. Sounds fun. A Minute to Think. Okay. Fascinating.
Assuming you don't have any gap books because you do not have a minute to read in the next couple of weeks.
No, none whatsoever. I can watch lots of videos on how to build stairs and such, but outside of that, no, not at all.
Okay.
You?
Well, I have another gap book that I am going to attempt from that same meeting, a recommendation, which maybe we talk about this one at some point, but it is You Are the Brand by Mike Kim. I have realized because for a long time I had kind of had this thought that the ideal company isn't attached to an individual and there's just a bunch of people who are contributing, and I still think there's a lot of value in contributing in a team, but do it in a way, I guess my evolved thinking at this point is do it in a way where it emphasizes the individuality of the people on the team, where the sum of the parts is greater than the individual. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That's how the saying goes. But as it pertains to a lot of the stuff that I do, I'm recognizing I just need to kind of lean into my brand. I am who I am. And being authentic with that, I feel like I try to do that already, but as it pertains to like faith-based productivity, and I'm trying to do some new things with that. I've got a assistant that helps me with all the editing of those sermon sketchnote videos now. I sent out my first newsletter in over a year. I want to do more of those. And I feel like this book being highly recommended from someone who I consider to be a mentor of mine, that there's a lot for me to learn about communicating authentically about who I am. So I'm going to try and get a little bit better at that.
Nice. Sounds interesting.
It should be interesting. We'll see. I'm going to read this as we record this. I'm leaving for the MaxDoc conference this afternoon, so that's the one that I'm bringing with me. All right. So thank you, everybody who has listened to this episode. Thank you to everyone who contributes financially to keep the show on the air. We really appreciate you paying members. If you want to join those paying members and have our undying gratitude, you can go to club.bookworm.fm. $5 a month, $50 a year. Like I said, helps us pay for the hosting, keep the lights on, buy the books that we're reading, etc. You do get a couple of perks if you decide that you want to support the show. That way you can get access to all of the MindNote files that I take all these notes and I upload both the PDF version and the MindNote file. So if you want to use MindNotes as kind of like the basis, you can edit those and you get access to some Gap Book episodes that Joe recorded before he started fixing up a house. You get a bookworm wallpaper, stuff like that. So club.bookworm.fm if you want to support the show.
Awesome. And if you are one of the amazing people who has made the wonderful decision to read books and do that along with us, instead of waiting for the episode to release first, then you need to purchase Courage is Calling by Ryan Holiday, and we'll discuss that with you in a couple weeks.